The air inside the auction hall was thick with the smell of sweat, oil, and something far worse, the stench of cruelty. Rows of alien bidders sat in a grand circular chamber, their eyes locked onto the elevated stage where captives were paraded like merchandise. Some were strong warriors, their hands bound in energy shackles, while others were fragile beings trembling in fear. Among them stood Zyra, a tall, slender alien woman of the Velthari race, her silver hair cascading down her back, her violet eyes dull with hopelessness. Once, her people were proud and free, but after the invasion of her homeworld, she was nothing more than a prize to be sold. A metal collar around her neck hummed with suppressive energy, preventing her from using her natural strength. The slaver, a grotesque reptilian creature with yellow eyes and sharp teeth, grinned at the crowd. "This one," he growled, gripping Zyra's chin roughly to force her to face the audience, "is rare, a Velthari. Strong, obedient, and quite a sight. Let's start the bidding, shall we?" Laughter and murmurs filled the hall as wealthy alien buyers shouted their offers. Some wanted her for labor, others as a decorative possession, and a few whispered about far worse intentions. Zyra stood still, her heart pounding, but she did not cry. She had learned long ago that tears changed nothing. Then a voice cut through the noise. A human voice. 10,000 credits. The room fell into a brief silence. Heads turned toward the back of the hall, where a tall figure leaned against the wall, arms crossed. He was a human, something rarely seen in these parts of the galaxy. His name was Darius Kane, a former soldier turned wanderer, dressed in dark, rugged clothing, his expression unreadable. His offer had been bold, almost reckless. No human in their right mind would challenge an alien warlord for a slave. The slaver's grin widened. "Ah, a human. What will you do with a Velthari, little man? She'll break you in half." Darius did not respond. He simply increased his bid. 15,000. One of the warlords, a thick-skinned brute with red eyes, growled. 20,000. Darius didn't hesitate. 50,000. A shocked silence fell over the chamber. Even the warlords hesitated. Humans were seen as weaker, lesser beings in this part of space, yet this one had challenged them openly. The slaver's eyes gleamed with greed. "Sold. To the human fool." He chuckled and tossed a control device to Darius. "She's yours. Try not to get yourself killed." As the auction continued with new captives, Darius approached Zyra. The energy bindings on her wrists released with a hiss. For the first time in years, she could move freely, but she did not run. Her eyes locked onto the humans, full of suspicion. "You bought me," she said, her voice cold and guarded. Darius shrugged. "I freed you." She frowned. "I'm still wearing this." She pointed at the metal collar. Without a word, Darius pulled a small device from his pocket and pressed it against the collar's side. A sharp beep followed, and the metal restraint unlocked, falling to the ground with a dull clang. Zyra blinked, stunned. No master had ever removed a slave's collar. "You can go," Darius said simply. Zyra stared at him. "Go, just like that. No catch, no demands. No one freed a slave for nothing." She didn't trust him. But before she could say anything, a deep alarm sounded through the halls. "Someone's coming," Darius muttered. "If you want to be free, then move." Without another word, he turned and walked toward the exit, disappearing into the shadows. For a moment, Zyra stood frozen. Then her feet moved on their own, following the only person who had ever given her a chance at freedom. Zyra's feet barely made a sound as she followed Darius Kane through the dark corridors of the slaver's compound. The air was thick with the scent of metal and damp stone, and the distant sound of alarms echoed around them. They had only minutes before guards would come searching. She still couldn't believe it. She was free. No more chains. No more collar. But freedom came with a new problem: trusting the human who had bought her. Darius moved fast, his footsteps steady and confident. He seemed like a man who had done this before, sneaking into dangerous places and walking out alive. He wasn't like the slavers, nor was he like the warlords who had tried to buy her. So why had he done it? They reached a metal door at the end of a dimly lit passage. Darius pulled out a small device and pressed it against the lock. A soft beep followed, and the door slid open. "Stay close," he said, stepping inside. Zira hesitated. She had spent years in captivity, obeying, fearing punishment. Now she had a choice. She could run in the opposite direction and disappear into the lawless streets outside, or she could follow the human who freed her. Her instincts screamed at her to run, but deep inside, a small voice whispered something else. He could have left her in chains. He didn't. With a sharp breath, she followed him inside. A moment of freedom. The room was a storage bay, crates stacked high, flickering lights overhead. Darius moved quickly, grabbing a jacket from one of the boxes and tossing it to her. "Here, it'll help you blend in," he said. Zira caught it, hesitating. The fabric was rough but warm. She slowly put it on, feeling its weight settle over her shoulders. For the first time in years, she wasn't wearing the thin garments of a slave. Darius turned to a control panel on the wall. Pressing a few buttons, a holographic map flickered to life. "The slavers will be looking for us soon," he muttered. "We need to get out before they lock down the exits." Zira crossed her arms. "You seem to have a plan. Why would a human risk this much for me?" Darius didn't look at her. "Because I could." She narrowed her eyes. That answer wasn't enough. Before she could press further, loud footsteps echoed outside the door. "Guards." Darius grabbed her wrist. "Move." They sprinted toward another exit at the back of the storage bay. Darius kicked open a maintenance hatch, and they slipped inside, just as the door behind them burst open with armed slavers. "They were here," a voice snarled. Zira's heart pounded. Too close. Trust is a dangerous thing. They emerged outside into a sprawling alien city, towering metal structures, neon signs flashing in different languages, and crowds of creatures moving through the streets. The city was alive with noise, speeders flying overhead, markets filled with strange goods, and the ever-present danger of crime. Zira inhaled deeply. The air tasted like freedom. Darius led her through the crowds, moving like a shadow, disappearing into narrow alleyways whenever patrols passed. Zira followed, keeping her head down, but her mind was racing. Finally, they stopped in a quiet, run-down section of the city. Darius tapped a code on a metal door, and it slid open to reveal a small, hidden ship. Zira stepped inside, scanning the interior. It was simple but functional: a cockpit, a sleeping area, and enough supplies for travel. "This is yours?" she asked. Darius nodded. "It is now." She frowned. "Why did you buy me, human?" Darius sighed, leaning against the wall. "I didn't buy you. I bought your freedom." Zira studied him carefully. She had seen countless faces of cruelty in her time as a slave. But his expression wasn't cruel. It was tired, determined, and strangely kind. Still, she wasn't ready to trust him. "I don't owe you anything," she said firmly. Darius smirked. "Never said you did." Zira folded her arms. "So, what now?" Darius moved to the control panel and started the ship's engines. "Now we leave this place before the bounty hunters start looking for us." Zira hesitated. She could still walk away. She could disappear into the city, find her own way. But as she looked out at the neon-lit streets, she realized something. She had no home left to return to. Darius had saved her, but more than that, he had given her something no one else ever had: a choice. And for the first time in years, Zira made one. She stepped forward, into the ship, into the unknown. The hum of the ship's engine vibrated through the floor as Zira sat in the co-pilot's seat, staring at the stars beyond the cockpit window. They had escaped the slavers' city, leaving behind the chains, the auction, and the cruel aliens who had controlled her life. Yet, she did not feel safe. She stole a glance at Darius Kane, the human who had freed her. He sat at the controls, navigating through the dense traffic of ships leaving the planet. His hands moved over the controls with practiced ease, his expression calm, focused. Too calm. Zira frowned. They'll come after us. Darius didn't look at her. I know. She leaned back, arms crossed. Then why aren't you worried? Darius smirked slightly. Because I have a plan. Zira narrowed her eyes. She didn't like surprises, not after everything she had been through. And what's that? Before he could answer, the ship's alarm blared. Unidentified vessel, lower your speed and prepare for boarding. A robotic voice crackled through the communicator. Zira's heart clenched. The bounty hunters had found them. Darius exhaled sharply. Figures they'd be fast. He flipped a switch, and suddenly, the ship veered downward, diving straight into a chaotic mess of space traffic. Enormous freighters, passenger cruisers, and pirate vessels filled the sector, making it the perfect cover. The bounty hunter's ship, a sleek black warship, moved aggressively through the traffic, following them. They're gaining on us, Zira said. Darius grinned, eyes locked on the screen. Let's see how good they are at dodging. He yanked the controls sharply to the left, squeezing through a narrow gap between two massive cargo ships. The bounty hunters tried to follow, but their ship scraped the side of a freighter, sending sparks flying. Zira watched in amazement. You're insane. Darius chuckled. That's why I'm still alive. Nowhere left to run. Despite his skill, the bounty hunters weren't giving up. Their warship stabilized and fired a warning shot. A bright blue plasma bolt streaked past them, shaking the ship. Zira gripped the side of her seat. That was close. Darius muttered, They want us alive. If they wanted to kill us, we'd be dust by now. He tapped on the control panel, bringing up a holographic map. We need to disappear. There's a debris field up ahead. If we get inside, they won't be able to track us. Zira scanned the map. That's suicide. Half the ships that enter never come out. Darius grinned. Guess we better not be one of them. Before she could argue, the ship plunged into the debris field. A game of shadows. Inside the field, shattered remains of destroyed ships floated like silent ghosts, their broken metal hulls spinning in the dark. The radar was useless. The debris messed with the scanners. Zira held her breath as Darius killed the ship's engine, letting them drift among the wreckage. The bounty hunters followed, their ship moving cautiously. Zira whispered, They'll find us. Darius shook his head. Not if we stay quiet. The enemy ship passed dangerously close. Zira could see their glowing scanners sweeping over the wreckage, searching for them. Her muscles tensed. If they found them now, there would be no escape. For what felt like an eternity, the warship hovered nearby. Then it turned away. A moment later, it blasted off in the opposite direction, searching elsewhere. Zira exhaled. That actually worked. Darius smirked. Told you. They rely too much on scanners. They don't know how to think like a human. He powered the ship's engine slowly, avoiding sudden movements that could give them away. Zira watched him in silence. This human, he was different. Smart, brave, reckless. And for the first time in years, she wasn't alone. A new reality. Once they cleared the debris field, Darius set a course for a hidden human colony on the edge of the galaxy. Zira turned to him. What happens now? Darius leaned back. Now you decide. You're free, Zira. No chains, no orders. You can go anywhere. Her throat tightened. She had dreamed of freedom, but now that she had it, she had no idea what to do with it. Her people were gone. She had no home, no family. Darius must have seen her hesitation because he added, You don't have to figure it out today. But if you want, you can stay with me. No debts, no conditions. Zira studied him. He wasn't offering ownership. He was offering a choice. And for the first time, she wasn't afraid to take it. Zara sat in the co-pilot's seat, staring at the endless stars outside the window. The ship hummed softly as it drifted through deep space, heading toward an unknown destination. She had never traveled without fear before, always under someone's control, always waiting for the next command. But now, for the first time, she was free. Yet, the weight in her chest did not disappear. She glanced at Darius Kane, the human who had bought her freedom. He sat at the controls, focused, his fingers tapping lightly on the console. He had not forced her to stay. He had not treated her like an object. But why? "Where are we going?" Zara finally asked. Darius didn't look away from the controls. "A place where you can be safe. A hidden human colony. No slavers, no warlords. Just people trying to live free." Zara frowned. "And then what?" Darius shrugged. "Then, it's up to you. You can stay or you can leave. No one will force you." She studied his face, searching for deception. There was none. That was what made him different. Every other person she had met in this lawless galaxy wanted something: power, control, obedience. But not him. She sighed, leaning back. "You don't even know who I am, do you?" Darius raised an eyebrow. "I know you're Zara. I know you're Velthari. And I know you don't trust easily." She smirked slightly. "That's not much." Darius leaned back in his chair. "Then tell me, who are you?" For a moment, she hesitated. She had not spoken of her past in years. She had buried it, locked it away. But now, she was tired of carrying it alone. Taking a deep breath, she began. "The fall of Velthar. My planet, Velthar, was once powerful," Zara said quietly. "Our people were warriors. We built cities that touched the sky, ships that could cross galaxies. We had enemies, of course, but none strong enough to break us." Darius listened without interrupting. "Then they came," she continued. "The Vorak Empire, a species that believed strength meant ruling over others. They didn't attack with armies. They attacked with betrayal. They made alliances with Velthari nobles, offered them wealth and power in exchange for submission. And when my people realized the truth, it was too late." Her hands clenched into fists. "Our leaders fell. Our warriors fought. But we were outnumbered, outmatched. The Vorak didn't just conquer Velthar. They broke us. They burned our cities, took our people as slaves, and erased our name from the stars." Silence hung in the air. Darius's expression darkened. "And you?" Zara exhaled slowly. "I was a fighter. My father was a general. We held out for as long as we could. But in the end, we lost. I was captured, sold, traded, treated like a trophy. That's how I ended up in that auction." Darius watched her carefully. "So you've never been free?" She shook her head. "Not since Velthar fell." A moment passed before Darius spoke again. "You said the Vorak erased your people, but you're still here. That means Velthar isn't gone." Zara blinked. "What?" Darius leaned forward. "As long as you live, Velthar isn't dead. You're still fighting, even now. Maybe you weren't free before, but you are now. And that means you get to decide what happens next." Zara stared at him. No one had ever said that to her before. She had always been running, surviving, trapped in the past. But Darius, he spoke as if she still had a future. She looked down at her hands. Could she really rebuild what was lost? Was that even possible? She didn't know. But for the first time, she wanted to find out. A reason to fight. The ship beeped softly, signaling their approach to the colony. Zara looked at the small, distant planet ahead. "How many humans live there?" she asked. "A few thousand," Darius replied. "They came here after Earth got pulled into the war. Some were refugees, others were soldiers. But they built something new, something better." Zara hesitated. "And you? Why are you helping me?" Darius was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke. "Because I know what it's like to lose everything." Zara's breath caught. There was pain in his voice, the kind she recognized, the pain of someone who had lived through war, loss, and survival. She had assumed he was just another human traveler, but now she realized there was more to him. Much more. She nodded slowly. Then maybe we're not so different after all. Darius smirked. Guess not. As the ship descended, Zyra felt something unfamiliar stirring inside her. Hope. For years, she had been a prisoner, a fighter with nothing left to fight for. But now, for the first time, she had a choice. And this time, she would make it for herself. The ship descended through the planet's atmosphere, shaking slightly as it cut through the thick clouds. Below them, Zyra saw a settlement hidden between mountains, far from the reach of slavers or warlords. The colony was not grand like the cities of her homeworld, but it was alive, a place where people had built something from nothing. Darius guided the ship toward a landing pad on the outskirts of the colony. As they touched down, Zyra's heart pounded. She had escaped captivity, outrun bounty hunters, and survived against the odds. But stepping onto this planet felt like stepping into the unknown. She wasn't afraid of fighting. She was afraid of what came after. Darius stood up from the pilot's seat and looked at her. You ready? Zyra hesitated for a second before nodding. The ramp lowered, and fresh air rushed inside. Warm, clean, peaceful. Zyra took her first step into the colony, and for the first time in years, she was not walking as a slave. Not everyone trusts an alien. The colony was small but full of life. Humans walked through the streets, repairing buildings, trading supplies, and laughing with one another. Some carried weapons, always prepared for danger, but there was no fear in their eyes. As Zyra walked beside Darius, she felt eyes on her. People whispered, some stopping to watch her. A group of armed men approached them. One of them, a tall, bearded man with sharp eyes, stepped forward. Darius, he said, nodding. You were supposed to be back days ago. Darius shrugged. Ran into trouble. The man's eyes shifted to Zyra, and his expression darkened. And you brought an alien with you. Zyra felt a flicker of irritation, but stayed silent. Darius crossed his arms. She's not a threat, Logan. Logan, clearly a leader in the colony, frowned. We don't trust aliens, Kane. You know that. Last time we let one in, they tried to sell us out. I didn't ask for trust, Darius replied. I asked for a chance. Logan looked at Zyra, his gaze cold. Are you a spy? Zyra's fists clenched, but she forced herself to stay calm. I was a prisoner of the Vorak, just like many of your people. I fought for my freedom. And I'm not here to cause trouble. Logan studied her for a long moment before sighing. She stays in your sector, Kane. If she causes problems, it's on you. Darius smirked. Fair enough. Zyra watched as Logan and his men walked away. She turned to Darius. They don't like aliens. Darius shrugged. Humans have been burned before. They don't forget easily. Zyra understood. Neither did she. A glimpse of a new life. Darius led her through the colony to a small house near the edge of the settlement. It was simple. One room, a bed, a table, and supplies stacked against the walls. Nothing like the grand palaces of Felthar. But to Zyra, it was freedom. It's not much, but it's safe, Darius said, setting down his bag. You can stay here for now. Zyra ran her fingers over the wooden table, feeling its rough texture. She had spent years in metal cages, sleeping on cold floors. Now she had a place of her own. No chains, no orders. She turned to Darius. Why are you doing this? Darius leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. Because I know what it's like to have nowhere to go. Silence filled the room. Zyra wasn't sure what to say. Finally, Darius spoke again. You don't have to decide anything today, but if you want to fight for something again, the colony could use you. Zyra looked at him. Fighting is all I know. Darius smirked. Then you'll fit right in. For the first time in a long while, Zyra let herself smile. An unfinished battle. That night, as she sat outside under the stars, Zyra thought about everything that had happened. She had spent years as a prisoner, surviving but never truly living. But now, she had a choice. The Vorak had destroyed her home. But maybe, just maybe, she could build something new here. Darius stepped outside and handed her a drink. "You look like you're thinking too hard." Zyra took the cup and smirked. "I was just wondering, when do I start training?" Darius grinned. "Tomorrow. Hope you're ready." Zyra looked at the stars one last time. This wasn't the end of her story. It was just the beginning. The early morning air was crisp as Zyra stepped onto the training grounds. The colony had a makeshift combat arena, an open space surrounded by metal barriers, where humans trained daily to defend themselves from threats. Zyra stretched her arms, feeling a strange sense of excitement. For the first time in years, she wasn't fighting to survive. She was fighting to become stronger. Darius Kane stood beside her, arms crossed. "You sure about this?" Zyra smirked. "Afraid I might be better than you." Darius chuckled. "We'll see." Around them, several human fighters watched with curiosity. Most were wary of Zyra, but a few seemed eager to see what she could do. Logan, the colony's leader, stepped forward, tossing Darius a training staff. "Let's see if your alien can keep up." Zyra narrowed her eyes. She wasn't here to prove herself to them, but she wanted to prove something to herself. Darius spun the staff in his hands, motioning for her to attack. "Whenever you're ready." Zyra didn't hesitate. She lunged forward, moving faster than any human should have. Darius barely had time to block before she spun and aimed a second strike at his ribs. He dodged, grinning. "Not bad." Zyra pressed the attack, her movements sharp and precise. For years, she had fought against slavers, soldiers, and warlords. She wasn't going to hold back just because her opponent was human. Darius blocked another strike, then swept his leg out. Zyra jumped over it effortlessly. Gasps echoed around the arena. The humans had expected a fighter, but not a warrior. Darius smirked. "You're fast." Zyra grinned. "You're slow." Darius suddenly changed his style, moving unpredictably. He wasn't as strong or fast as her, but he was smart. He adapted quickly, forcing Zyra to stay on guard. For the first time in years, Zyra enjoyed the fight. It wasn't about survival, it was about skill, about learning. And for the first time, she saw something in Darius's eyes that she had never seen in another fighter. Respect. The attack. The match ended when Logan called for a stop. Darius and Zyra stood across from each other, breathing hard but smiling. "That was impressive," Logan admitted, though he still looked cautious. "You're better than I expected." Zyra didn't care about his approval, but it was a step forward. Just as Darius was about to respond, the colony's warning alarms blared. "Danger." Darius grabbed his communicator. "Report." A voice crackled through the speaker. "We've got incoming ships. Fast. Too organized for scavengers." Zyra's stomach tightened. She knew exactly what that meant. "The slavers found us," she muttered. Darius exchanged a glance with her. "They're coming for you." Zyra refused to run. She had spent years running. She grabbed a nearby rifle and loaded it. "Then let's show them they made a mistake." Darius grinned. "Now you're thinking like a human." A battle for freedom. The colony turned into a war zone within minutes. Enemy ships hovered above, dropping slavers into the streets. Colony defenses fired back, explosions shaking the ground. Zyra moved through the battlefield like a shadow, her instincts sharp. She had spent years in chains. She wasn't going back. Darius fought beside her, his precision deadly. The two moved like they had been fighting together for years, covering each other's blind spots. Zyra kicked an enemy to the ground, spinning to blast another. "We need to take out their leader." Darius pointed to a ship in the distance. "Their command unit is there. If we take it down, they'll retreat." Zyra grinned. Then let's move. They pushed forward through the chaos, cutting through enemy lines. Together, they were unstoppable. A new beginning. The battle was over within the hour. The slavers had underestimated the colony, and they had paid the price. Zira stood at the edge of the battlefield, watching the enemy ships retreat. She had won. She was free. Darius walked up beside her. You did good. Zira smirked. You weren't bad either. For the first time, she realized something. This place was worth fighting for. These people were worth fighting for. And maybe, just maybe, so was Darius. The battlefield was silent now. Smoke still lingered in the air, and the ground was littered with the remains of enemy ships and weapons. The colony had won. Zira stood at the edge of the wreckage, her heart pounding. She had fought before, but never for a place she wanted to protect. She turned and saw Darius Kane, standing beside her, covered in dust and bruises but still grinning. You were incredible out there, he said. Zira smirked. So were you. For a human. Darius chuckled. I'll take that as a compliment. The colonists began gathering, checking on the wounded, repairing damaged buildings, and celebrating their victory. But not all of them were happy. Logan, the colony's leader, approached with his arms crossed. His sharp gaze landed on Zira. We never would have survived this attack without her, Darius said firmly before Logan could speak. Logan sighed. I know. She fought like one of us. He looked at Zira. You proved yourself today. Zira met his gaze, waiting for the but that usually followed such words. Instead, Logan extended his hand. You're welcome here, if you want to stay. Zira hesitated. The invitation felt unreal. She had spent years as a prisoner, as a slave. She had never been given a choice. Now she had one. She reached out and shook Logan's hand. I'll stay. A small ripple of approval spread through the crowd. The tension wasn't completely gone, but something had changed. She was no longer just an outsider. She was one of them. The human way. That night, the colony gathered around a large fire, sharing food and stories. It was a tradition, Darius explained, something humans did after a great victory. Zira watched as people laughed and drank, despite their injuries. Humans were strange. Even after battle, they could still find joy. She sat next to Darius, feeling an unfamiliar sense of warmth, not just from the fire, but from the people around her. Darius nudged her. You thinking too hard again? Zira smirked. Just trying to understand how you humans work. Darius grinned. You'll get used to it. Zira took a sip from her drink. The warmth spread through her chest. She liked this. She liked being here. An unexpected proposal. Later that night, as the fire died down, and people returned to their homes, Zira followed Darius up a small hill overlooking the colony. The stars above were clear and endless, just like the possibilities ahead of her. Darius turned to her. You really want to stay? Zira nodded. Yes, I think. I finally found a place worth fighting for. Darius smiled. Good, because I was going to ask you to stay anyway. She raised an eyebrow. Oh, and why's that? Darius hesitated for a moment, then said, because I want you to stay with me. Zira's heart skipped a beat. She had never expected those words. Darius scratched the back of his head. I know you don't owe me anything. And I know you're still figuring things out. But he exhaled. I don't just want you to stay in the colony. I want you to stay with me. Zira stared at him, her chest tightening with something she didn't fully understand. Darius was different. He had saved her, but he had never controlled her. He had given her freedom, but also a reason to stay. She smirked. Are you asking me to be yours, human? Darius chuckled. I guess I am. Zira stepped closer, tilting her head. In Veltheri culture, when a warrior proposes, they must prove their strength. Darius raised an eyebrow. You already beat me in a fight. She grinned. I know. For the first time in years, Zyra made a choice that was completely her own. She reached up, gently cupping his face. "Then I accept." Darius's breath caught. "You do." Zyra smirked. "I do." Darius laughed softly, then pulled her into a tight embrace. She wasn't alone anymore. She had a new home, a new fight, and a human who had given her more than freedom. He had given her a future. As the night stretched on, Zyra looked up at the stars, knowing that this was just the beginning. She was no longer a slave. She was no longer lost. She was home. The end.